Hey everyone, this is Sebastian. What you're about to see is a revised edition of what I originally began as a 17-page essay talking about my issues with Dear Evan Hansen. There is a lot of things that I had to say about this musical, and I will get to them with the entirety of this video, but before I do, I want to make a very small clarification. This video is not meant to tell you that you're wrong or stupid for liking anything about this show, whether it's the music or the characters. And if you personally identify with any difficult struggles presented during the show, thank you for staying strong and being here to let others know that it does indeed get better. Please don't take this video as an attack or criticism of you or your taste. There's enough douchebaggery on the internet by people who do that for a living. That being said, this video will go into heavy detail picking the show apart in order to analyze everything that I believe it did wrong. With that out of the way, this was a long time coming, and I'm very excited to present you all with what I originally planned to be my very first video. As my 1000 subscriber special for all of you, thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy.
Broadway's best musical is Dear Evan Hansen.
That was You Will Be Found from the hit Broadway show Dear Evan Hansen, sung by fans all over the world. The musical touches on a difficult topic, but one that deserves our attention.
It's the Broadway musical on its way to becoming a smash hit that celebrates parents and teens. They're lining up to get a seat.
Yeah, now we're not talking about Hamilton. It's a great new show called Dear Evan Hansen.
You know, it's ironic that a musical about people struggling to connect is connecting so strongly with audiences. Dear Evan Hansen has taken Broadway by storm and thrust its just 23-year-old lead into superstardom and a Tony nomination.
Despite centering on a mentally ill kid and being spurred on by a suicide, Dear Evan Hansen definitely isn't about mental illness.
A main reason why a lot of people are kind of nebulous on what this plot is because the show itself, in all its promo materials, is being nebulous about what the plot is. All of his life, Evan Hansen has felt invisible, but when a tragic event shocks the community and thrusts him in the center of a rapidly evolving controversy, Evan is given the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to be someone else. That's one way to describe it, I guess.
Stars as the title character in the original new musical Dear Evan Hansen. Yeah, and he's earning rave reviews for his portrayal of a teen who exploits a family's grief to bolster his own popularity.
What the fuck?! Dear Evan Hansen, you and I need to have a talk. Whether you like it or not, you have become a notable piece of pop culture and have assessed a controversial reputation for being positive and inspiring despite all of the deplorable things you've done in your show. I think the actions of both you and your musical, while seen as well-intentioned by many, are those that require a serious discussion and one I fear many will brush off or ignore due to how much of an influence you've had on their lives. I'm not here out of anger or cynicism. I'm here because I have something important to say, and I fear if I don't say it now, things will only escalate further as many more jump in to speak their minds on this issue. Believe me, I want to approach this nicely and fairly, and I'll try my hardest to be civil. But don't think for even a second that I'm not gonna get critical over what you've done. This is not a review, this is a simple discussion. I hope this letter finds you well, and I hope you will take the time to listen to what I have to say. Sincerely, Sebastian. P.S. Lose the wig, you look like a tool.
Motherfucker, you look dirty.
It's been a long night. And the Tony Award goes to Dear Evan Hansen.
The year is 2017, on the night of July the 11th when the 71st Annual Tony Awards took place at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. A lot of memorable things happened that night. Leslie Odom Jr. and Cynthia Erivo performed the theme from New York, New York along with the Rockettes. Kevin Spacey opened the show while dressing up as a teenage boy in a performance that seriously has not aged well at all.
Have you ever felt like nobody would care?
And most surprising of all, Ben Platt became the youngest actor in history to win the Tony Award for Best Performance by a Leading Actor in a Musical for his role in Dear Evan Hansen.
When I was 6 years old, I was the prince in Cinderella in a blue sequin vest at the Adderley School in the Palisades in California, and I've spent every single day of my life since then just madly in love with musical theater. It's where I found everything I've ever loved and where I belong, and I've dreamed every day since of being on this stage and being part of this community of artists, so this is insane.
With music and lyrics by the now infamous Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, Dear Evan Hansen tells the story of a socially anxious teenager with a broken arm named Evan Hansen, who fabricates a relationship he had with a troubled teenager named Connor Murphy, who takes his own life after his parents find an apparent suicide note addressed to him personally, talking about the kind of feelings he had about him and his sister Zoe. What he doesn't tell them is that the letter was actually written by Evan to himself as part of his therapy counseling, and while he tries to come clean about the origin of the letter at first, he then proceeds to keep the lie going by talking about what he and Connor did on their spare time and becoming more close to the Murphy family as a result, much to the chagrin of Zoe, whom aside from being Evan's crush, is also having a hard time accepting that her brother was anything more than a problematic drug addict. Eventually, shenanigans ensue, with Evan going as far as fabricating emails to make the fake relationship more convincing, a social media movement organizing to raise awareness in Connor's memory, and all the while, Evan continues to reap the rewards from his lies as he and Zoe start dating, until the truth slowly begins to creep in and he inevitably is forced to come clean both about the lie as well as the truth about how he broke his arm in the first place. Oh yeah, remember the arm, will you? It's gonna be important, and may I mention, really stupid when we talk about it later. The musical was a colossal smash hit, breaking box office records and winning several Tonys, including Best Musical, Best Book of a Musical, and Best Orchestration, which given that Hamilton's Alex Lacamoire was involved, it's really no wonder why it won. The musical was also a critical darling and was adored universally by everyone, mostly kids and teenagers who could identify and relate to many of the themes and characters that the show had to offer. So much so that they offered a lower price ticket just so that teenage audience members can see it without needing to break their wallets doing so. The message of the musical was resounding and heartwarming, and the music has taken on a life of its own, with social media covering it and paying respects to several recent tragedies by performing the Act 1 closer, You Will Be Found. Taken out of context, the music perfectly encapsulated the tears and sorrow by several people growing up feeling broken and alone, and resonated perfectly with the kind of audience that a man like Tim Burton or Alex Timbers would kill for. However, in context, the music feels completely different. I became a fan of the musical by listening to the cast recording and watching Ben Platt performing the song Waving Through a Window at the Tonys in 2020. Admittedly, very late to the discussion, but still. Wonderful timing though, am I right? The music spoke to me in such a fundamental way, and the rawness and honesty of these performances was unlike anything I've ever heard on stage or on film. And yet, despite being a fan of the music, I've yet to actually experience the show personally, until quite recently when opportunity came knocking on the door. Upon watching it, a lot of things felt extremely off for me. The music was still great, but under an uncomfortable backdrop that I'm having trouble connecting to. The performances were still spectacular, but some of these characters were downright unlikable. And the story that was supposed to be heartwarming and moving was instead sickening and deplorable, mostly because of the characters that were weaving the plot. I finished the musical and enjoyed it for the most part, but felt completely empty when it stopped. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, I just felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. Superman's death in Batman v Superman got me more emotional than this musical, and that movie isn't even good. So what the hell happened? Was it that I wasn't in the right mood? Was it because I couldn't relate personally to many of its complex themes? Or was there something else entirely, something that many fans are having a tough time coming to terms with? Whatever the case might be, I intend to get to the bottom of this and dissect this entire musical to find out what the hell is going on. I'm Sebastian from Cinemageddon Reviews, and this is Dear Evan Hansen. There is a lot to cover when it comes to talking about this musical and all the questions and concerns that are being raised by many who've seen it. However, before we can truly dive into this mess, I have to warn you all ahead of time that this video will be covering almost every inch of this musical. I say this because despite this musical's legendary status and reputation, it's kind of amazing how the majority of people who heard about it or know about it haven't actually seen it. In hindsight, this is no real big shock, as musicals such as these, whether they're in New York, Chicago, London, or inside the wonderfully twisted mind of Baz Luhrmann, stage musicals such as these aren't as easily accessible to the majority of the public, and I should know given where I live. As a result, I do believe that full context is necessary for this musical in order to get my point across, and as a result, I need to issue a disclaimer. This entire video from here on in is going to be diving ass first into spoiler territory for the stage version of Dear Evan Hansen. As many viewers already know, the film version is set to release in just a few days, so if you hadn't had a chance to see either and don't want to risk getting spoiled, now is your chance to opt out. You have been warned. The first thing that came to mind when it comes to the musical as a whole and my divisive thoughts on it ironically came from the titular Evan Hansen himself. More specifically, the original Broadway Evan Hansen played wonderfully by Ben Platt. Now, let me start off by saying I love Ben Platt. He is a wonderful actor, a talented singer, and being able to combine both of those talents makes him a superstar in the making. He also managed to bring a feeling of vulnerability to such a challenging role that, while many have tried, none were able to replicate the same energy that Platt brought to the table. His Evan Hansen was a great performance and one for the record books in a long line of outstanding leading men in theater. That being said,
wow. Oh, you know, kid, you kind of are a piece of shit.
Yeah, Captain Brady. He is good.
Let's not beat around the bush here. Evan Hansen is a deplorable piece of shit character who in any other story would be considered the bad guy. He's a lying, manipulative little scumbag who gets a free pass for being charming and relatable. Citation needed. This isn't even when things get uncomfortable. That comes later. The reason I call him deplorable, believe it or not, is not just because of what he does throughout the musical, but how it actively tries to absolve him of any accountability. This is a character who fabricates a friendly relationship with a recently deceased student whom he did not know personally and drags his ODing ass around metaphorically upon seeing the impact it's leaving amongst others. And in case you're wondering what exactly is his relationship with Connor showed up high to school one day and pushed him onto the floor after he assumed that Evan was making fun of him in a pent-up drug-induced rage.
Is that it?
That's it. The only thing stupider than this is the confrontation he has with Connor before he takes his own life. Connor signs his cast for no real discernible reason other than because the plot needs this to happen, and finds him printing one of his therapist letters and deduces with all the common sense of a teenager high on drugs that Evan wrote that letter with the sole purpose of Connor finding it in order to read it so that he can get triggered over the mention of his sister on the letter as a means of messing with him. And then he takes that letter with him and kills himself, leaving the letter in his person when they find the body the next day.
You serious?
Okay, that is without any doubt the stupidest bit of plot progression that I have ever seen for any story, especially one that's been praised for capturing realism among teenage audiences. And what's worse is that this serves as the impetus for the whole story. Connor dies, his parents think that he and Evan had a thing because of the letter.
Hijinks will ensue.
Now, to Evan's credit, he does at least try to set the record straight about the letter that Connor's parents found on him when he died, but is unable to properly communicate with them on account of both being in too much grief to listen. That's perfectly understandable. However, if at first they're unable to listen, you try to communicate with them at a better time or put in a bit more effort into it. I get that. I get that it must be awkward to be placed in a situation of mistaken friendship identity. If that even makes any sense. But you gotta know that nothing good will come out of lying about something this serious. But despite all logic and common sense saying otherwise, Evan eggs them on and even sings about the kind of adventures that the two had together. That should have been where he left it. But from that one rabbit hole of lies comes several other layers for him to fall into. As a result, he now has to sell the idea that this sociopathic asshole who pushed him onto the floor and drops vulgarities in front of his family like it was nothing.
Look at him, he's not listening. He's probably high.
He's definitely high.
Fuck you!
Is actually a really close friend that Evan had a lot of close ties with, and Evan does so in the form of fake emails written by him and his friend Jared. This is Jared. I hate Jared. Don't be like Jared. Fuck you, Jared. Evan's lies eventually spread throughout the entire school, and even the community becomes involved in a massive viral campaign to help keep Connor's memory alive. All the while, Evan and his friends profit off of the ordeal, with Jared even selling merchandise to capitalize on Connor's death. Did I mention I hate Jared? Evan, meanwhile, throughout this whole ordeal, comes to the realization that if he doesn't do something soon, Connor will fade away as just another dime a dozen kid who committed suicide. Part of the motivation for this is something we will be discussing later, and I promise you, it's gonna be just as stupid as you think. This leads to Evan singing the showstopper You Will Be Found, which becomes a viral hit and makes Connor Murphy a household name, for better or for worse. The Murphys are able to accept and grieve over his death in a healthier manner, exposure has been made about the seriousness of teen suicide, but most important of all, yes, even more important than the fact that there was a teenager who committed suicide, Evan gets a girlfriend. Connor's grieving sister Zoe, his crush, who thanks him for, and I quote,
"You've given me my brother back."
It's all making sense to me now.
There is a lot to unpack here, and I'm gonna try my best to condense this as much as possible. The first question is, why? Seriously, why is Evan doing any of this for someone he doesn't even know? Lying about a relationship with a dead person is fucked up enough as is, but you could have left it at that and moved on. Don't get involved with the stupidities your friends were doing. Don't bother with the emails because nobody was gonna give that much of a shit. There were so many things that you could have done to avoid this. But instead, you kept kindling it like a goddamn bonfire in Dark Souls, and for what? Who did you even do this for exactly? Whose benefit was this for? Was it for Connor? Was it for the Murphys? Or was it for you, Evan? This is one of my biggest issues with this character. Evan Hansen is focusing so much on keeping Connor's memory alive, not because he cared about him and wants to preserve his legacy. Again, the two did not have any established relationship apart from Connor pushing him into the floor. Instead, his social life begins to make a huge 180 turn, and where before he was unable to talk to his crush without rambling in the rapid fire pace that only Ben Platt and Jesse Eisenberg can pull off.
And interesting, like easy to talk to, approachable, but mostly be yourself. That's the big, that's number one, be yourself.
How do you distinguish yourself in a population of people who all got 1600 on their SATs?
Station, the marina, the mini motorcycle repair shop, the gas station, the construction office, work, the real working drawbridge, highway, passenger ramp, and garage doors, or take a micro machine flying machine in for a landing. Phew!
Now he scored enough heroic brownie points that he manages to leave her in enough of an emotionally compromised state that the two begin to make out in the end of Act 1. One can argue that he tries to come clean beforehand, but this isn't a romantic declaration of love between a couple that the audience is rooting for. This is an opportunistic shitbag taking advantage of a girl currently grieving over the death of her brother. Like I said before, if this were a different story, Evan Hansen would have been the villain, and framed from his perspective, the musical is essentially following the mindset of a sociopath who is lying and manipulating his way into getting what he wants. What really sickens me to my core about this is that the character gets absolved of all of this criticism for two reasons. One of which I will be addressing later, but the other being that the show is insisting that he doesn't know any better because of his goddamn mental state. I hate to even bring up this argument, but for comparison's sake, Dear Evan Hansen has a frighteningly similar debacle with another high-profile media piece that has also been deemed problematic, Joker. Wait, let me explain. There is a reason for this. Both feature mental health-stricken protagonists, but the narrative isn't about their mental health or even really explains what their mental illness is, aside from vague social issues and strange behavior. But more so, none of these stories have anything to say about mental health or how damaging it is to the person suffering from it. Instead, both stories are about people suffering from mental health who feel like they're finally getting the attention they so desire by unorthodox means. Evan Hansen's mental illness is often used as a justification to defend the character of any wrongdoing because he's so cute and quirky, even though he himself is responsible for many of the terrible things that happen to other people in this story, whether he intended it to or not. What I'm trying to get here is that having a mental illness is absolutely no excuse for this kind of behavior, no matter who you are or what you're suffering from. It's not even a case of him acting irrationally without thinking. He makes all of the choices that result in the fabrications, the emails that others eventually get suspicious about, and the way he took some dead teenager he didn't know and turned him into a mini celebrity after his passing. He may say that he didn't want things to escalate the way that they do, but he sure as shit isn't doing a good job at preventing them from escalating. This is probably the worst aspect of this musical to many who've already seen it with a more critical eye. Though in my opinion, there are other things to say, as this in particular is part of a much bigger underlying problem for both the character and the story. The misrepresentation of mental illness and the mixed message it sends about people who suffer from it. This is part of the reason I find it baffling when some people say that they relate to Evan Hansen in some capacity, because if I suffer from social anxiety or any other mental illness such as this, I would have been extremely offended at this musical for telling me that they understand what people like me are suffering from. Especially when it's portraying someone like that as a manipulative, opportunistic scumbag who continues the charade he could have easily stopped and metaphorically dragging the corpse of a dead teenager around Weekend at Bernie's style for as long as it conveniences him. He only ever comes clean about the ordeal when one of his friends starts to find inconsistencies with the emos he fabricated, and plus, the letter he wrote to himself goes viral, inspiring people to attack the Murphy family on social media and blaming them for the death of their son. There is another justification in quotations that the musical uses as a way of absolving him of any accountability, but we'll come back to that later on. For now though, let's address the Mike Feist-sized elephant in the room. God, that was such an awkward thing to say.
Hi, I'm Mike Feist, and I play Connor Murphy in Dear Evan Hansen.
Things have been crazy, and it sucks that we don't talk that much. But I should tell you that I think of you each night. I rub my nipples and start calling with the lights. Why would you write that? What the fuck?
Okay, quick question to anyone who's seen the musical, and I want you to be extremely honest with yourselves. Who is Connor Murphy? This is a question I want you to think about while I ramble on for the next 4 or 5 sentences.
Is this a test?
Connor Murphy is the oldest son of Larry and Cynthia Murphy and the older brother of Zoe. He's got really long hair and legs tall enough to help him tower over Bo Burnham, and he prefers to spend his free time getting high and dropping vulgarities in front of his family.
Fuck you! Fuck you!
What else? He's a social outcast and is often seen as a freak by other students, except for one who straight up calls him a school shooter because of his getup. 3 guesses on who it is. Time's up, it's Jared.
Hey, Connor! Loving the new hair length, very school shooter chic.
I fucking hate you, Jared. As a result, he tends to lash out and throws fits of rage to people he seemingly has no problem with because they see him as a freak. Now, based on the information that I just provided, I'm gonna ask you again. Who is Connor Murphy? The answer is very simple.
I have no idea! None! None.
Remember how I said that this was not a story about mental illness? Well, one thing that the musical is definitely about is a story about a troubled youth who suffers from depression and substance abuse, and eventually finds himself unable to handle the complexities of life, causing him to take out his own. A dark and tragic reminder that people may seem fine on the outside, but inside, they're crying and begging for help, feeling like nobody understands them, and imagining that life would probably be better off without them to ruin the lives of others. Is what I would say if this story was anything about Connor or the fact that he committed suicide.
What a very depressing thought.
Connor Murphy throughout this entire story is relegated to being nothing more than a sentient plot device with beautiful hair and legs longer than a CVS receipt. Connor Murphy does not matter. He is the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of musical theater, except where his character doesn't matter, what does matter is what his death does for the main protagonist and how it affects everybody else. We don't know anything about Connor Murphy other than what we get in the less than 14 minutes of showtime before he kills himself off stage. Instead, what we get from the entirety of the musical post-Requiem is a fictionalized dream version of him that appears for Evan Hansen in order to make awkward conversations to and give him advice and motivation to do what he does. Remember what I said about Evan's motivation to act out in order to prevent Connor from fading away from everybody's memory being just as stupid as you think? I present to you Evan's motivation being as stupid as you think. A false interpretation of who Connor was before he died, entirely fabricated and shaped from Evan's own warped perspective.
Excuse me, the fuck?
Yes, this douchebag's entire motivation is circulated from advice he's receiving from a ghost concocted out of his own imagination. What bothers me more than anything is that Connor had great potential to have a story of his own that the entirety of the musical could have revolved around. This could have been the Citizen Kane of musical theater, in the sense that it tells the story of a deceased main protagonist as we, the audience, slowly begin to uncover secrets about their past leading up to their demise. He certainly has the building blocks of a fascinating character study, right down to the substance abuse and depression. The musical, however, doesn't fucking care. It has no interest in exploring Connor Murphy. It doesn't care about his life, it doesn't care about his past, it sure as hell doesn't care about his problems or really anything about him. Instead, we the audience are only able to see him as a troubled asshole because that's who the character was in the thinly veiled perspective our characters are given about him. Maybe he had dreams. Maybe he had goals in life. Maybe he had anxieties that we as an audience can learn about and sympathize with. Maybe he was bisexual and had a tough time coming to terms with his sexuality and needed someone to talk about it so he didn't feel alone. Oh, and BT dubs, guess what? In the novelization, that's exactly what they implied. Think about that next time you listen to Sincerely Me while these two assholes are making gay jokes in 2016, written by one half of a composer duo who happens to be gay and thought that this was a good idea. Ridiculous. What we get instead is a story about a random teenage troublemaker who threw a printer towards his teacher in 2nd grade and ends his life in a non-descriptive manner because he misunderstood the meaning behind another random teen's letter that he wrote to himself for his therapist. We get the pleasure of having an immature moron write about how he loves to rub his nipples with delight thinking about the main protagonist as a joke, while that same protagonist imagines him talking to him in a Ratatouille-like fashion, making me wish I was watching the actual Ratatouille musical instead. Also, instead of getting to tell a sad story with a dark but relevant subject matter, what we get instead is a story about a teenager whose suicide gets glorified by a bunch of people who didn't know him personally, one of which lies about their relationship together, and another which profits financially from his death through fucking merchandising.
What the hell?
I'm gonna be very honest. When I began writing this back in December of 2020, I didn't expect to write as much as I did when I did. You would think that this would be the end of it and that there really isn't that much to say anymore. But none of these issues even come close to topping the number one fundamental problem that I have with this musical, and it is one that really didn't bother me until I got to a certain point in the climax of the show. This is where shit gets rough. This is something I really did not think I would have to be writing about, as I seriously did not think that anyone would do something like this, and do so in such a poor fashion. I'm actually feeling sick as I write this, and even sicker still having to record it. I am so fucking tired of this. Dear Evan Hansen is responsible for committing one of the biggest sins I have ever seen for a story as serious as this one. Mind you, by this point I've already gone on record talking about how it poorly represented mental health and how it turned one of its core characters into nothing more than a glorified plot device. However, these are all basic mistakes that any bad story can commit. Even some of the greatest movies, TV shows, and stage productions have fallen victim to many of these issues, and depending on who you ask, rarely are they ever brought up in conversation by those who love them. The same cannot be said about this, and this is something I take extremely seriously for good reason. Its depiction of teen suicide and the way this musical represented it was absolutely disrespectful and disgusting. I've personally witnessed many children and teens who dealt with serious stuff like depression, bipolar disorder, and even thoughts of suicide. Many of these people I was able to talk to personally and help out as much as I possibly can, and be there for them when they felt like nobody was there. Sadly, I know too many of them who aren't around to smile anymore or be told that it's gonna get better. To this day, I still wonder if any of the other people I've spoken with are still around, and whether or not they made a decision that would affect their lives forever. And it saddens me that nobody will ever know who these people are, as they're just teenagers with no special means and no interesting backgrounds. These are just regular kids. Nobody would think much of them because they don't really matter to anybody in the grand scheme of things, unless it's someone famous who dies and suddenly everyone starts donating to causes or saying that they're supporting people who suffer from that same disease or illness. The internet, love it or hate it, has given many people the ability to let their voices be heard, and for many feeling lost to be found by those who are looking to help. All it takes is one act of selflessness and one person to look up and say, "I'm here for you and you matter." You know, sometimes I look at myself and I wonder, why do movies, TV, and others even bother trying to tackle serious subject matter such as this? And when I really think about it, I'm reminded of every single cartoon or movie that taught me a very important lesson growing up. As we get older, we start to realize that we are all still learning, and some of us don't really always have the answers. So it's up to us to learn from those harsh moments in our lives and pass these lessons on to others who might need them. Others who might need to be told, you don't have to change yourself for that person that doesn't matter. You are special and valuable in more ways than one. You are not alone and you deserve to live. You will be found. I think my biggest problem with this musical, more so than anything else I've rambled on in this video, is that it completely spits in the face of that message in the most cynical and disgusting manner possible. Please, if you love this musical, if me saying that right now angers you, I understand, but please, let me explain. You Will Be Found isn't just another generically inspirational song that you'd find on a typical Pasek and Paul composition. You Will Be Found is supposed to be the core message of Dear Evan Hansen, so much so that it was incorporated into its marketing, and the song serves as an anthem for everyone who has ever felt sad, depressed, or alone in a world that feels like it doesn't want them. You Will Be Found has been covered by many artists and fans for their own personal reasons, and the song has taken on a life of its own outside of the musical that it belongs to. What I'm trying to say is that Dear Evan Hansen is proudly reaching out to anyone who has ever felt lost or broken and said, "I'm here for you and you're not alone." And I would be disingenuous if I said that this is a terrible message to give, especially since so many still feel like their mouths are being sewn shut and they need to scream but no one will hear. It's very rare for any form of media, whether it's film, TV, or stage, to reach an audience this massive with the courage to say what they feel needs to be said, and in doing so, drawing attention to the seriousness of important subject matter such as depression or teen suicide. My problem isn't that this musical is attempting any kind of Christ preaching or anything like that. I wouldn't have a problem with this musical had it not been for the fact that the way this musical goes about telling its message completely betrays everything that its message stands for. Dear Evan Hansen isn't a story about depression or teen suicide. Dear Evan Hansen is a story about a sociopathic jerk who lies about a relationship he had with a student he did not know aside from the name, who ends up committing suicide after mistaking that he was being made fun of. We don't know why he did it, we don't know what led to this happening, and we don't care about why he did it because the musical doesn't care either. The story only cares about how this character's death affects everybody else around him, while his suicide gets glorified and he is turned into the face of teenage depression and suicide. All the while the real main character continues to charade long enough for the world to unite in arms and score himself all of the attention he desires from others, including the girl that he likes. The message that I got from the music was that you are not alone. The message that I got from the musical was kill yourself, and if you're lucky, someone will take enough pity on you to glorify your passing and make you famous online. I made a comparison between Dear Evan Hansen and Joker a while ago. However, after writing this entire video months ago and taking the time to revise it, I realized that there is another piece of media that I can compare it to. 13 Reasons Why. In the sense that both are stories that try to be mature about the seriousness of suicide, but are not told or handled in a mature way. One can argue that 13 Reasons Why missed the mark entirely and glorified suicide unintentionally, and I believe that this was not what they wanted. But Dear Evan Hansen straight up takes a character who wasn't liked by many within the context of the show and turns him into a shining beacon after his passing. Connor is literally glorified by the entirety of the internet because Evan's speech got posted online and went viral. This musical is sending a very dangerous message to anyone who feels like they don't matter, and is telling them that they'll only be valued and appreciated after they die, because despite the heavy-handed marketing, Dear Evan Hansen doesn't take suicide as seriously as it says it does. But why? Why do you say that one of the most inspirational musicals ever released in recent memory, one that specifically helped jumpstart a wide conversation about the seriousness of teenage suicide, doesn't take suicide seriously? Simple. Because of the way they tried to excuse or justify Evan Hansen's behavior. This, ladies and gentlemen, is where I got angry.
Right. Yes, she likes me for who I am. Except you didn't happen to mention that everything you've told her, it's all been one big fucking lie, did you? Oh, you left that part out.
Remember a while ago when I said that there is another thing that the musical does in order to try and absolve Evan of all accountability? There is another justification in quotations that the musical uses as a way of absolving him of any accountability, but we'll come back to that later on. Well, this is the justification, and mind you, I say justification, but what I really mean to say is excuse. Get a load of this. During the second act's inevitable all is lost moment after Evan comes clean about the letter and gets the closest thing to actual repercussion for his actions, he and his mother have a talk about what happened, with her of course blaming herself for not being there for him and not noticing that he was suffering. And in the midst of this conversation, we finally find out how he broke his arm. Oh yeah, you probably forgot about that. During the first act of the musical, we are told that Evan had an accident in the park when he was climbing a tree. He missed his footing and ended up busting his arm when he fell into the floor. Just a reminder that Evan has an almost fetishistic obsession with trees, even incorporating it in his song For Forever. As it turns out, however, Evan's accident with the tree wasn't actually an accident. It was a suicide attempt.
How'd you break your arm? How'd you break your arm, Evan? I fell. Really? Is that what happened?
Yes, I lost my grip and then I fell, so.
Did you fall? Or did you let go?
What the fuck?
So let me get this straight. You're telling me throughout this entire story, he lies, he manipulates, and he screws up the lives of a grieving family because of the consequences of his actions, and right when he's finally gonna get the repercussion he deserves, the musical fucking posts a suicide card on the guy responsible for all the terrible bullshit that happens throughout the entirety of the story? Him?
Last summer, I just felt so alone.
So it's not enough that the musical glorified the suicide of one character who barely gets more than 15 minutes on stage before dying, but now, as if intentionally trying to prove that it can always get worse, it goes out of its way to absolve another character of any accountability for their actions by using suicide as both an excuse and as a means of audience sympathy? No! No!
How about no?
You heard me right. No! I will not show sympathy for this character because he doesn't fucking deserve it. Nothing that Evan Hansen does throughout this entire story warrants any kind of sympathy from me or anyone else for that matter, since his selfish actions have damaged the lives of a family who just lost a son to suicide and have no idea why he did so in the first place. One can argue that at the very least the story does not end with Evan being rewarded for his actions. His crush ends up breaking up with him and they don't get back together at the end, and she and her family eventually recover from the tragedy, and even Connor's memory remains etched into the collective unconscious of the community. That being said, Evan's deception never gets any kind of comeuppance. The Murphys keep his secret and nobody finds out the truth, meaning that he essentially got away with almost tearing a family apart after manipulating and lying to them for so long. But hey, so what if he betrayed their trust, manipulated his way to where he was, emotionally compromised his crush into falling for him, and tried to keep the charade going even after the suspicions arose? He had it rough! His father left when he was young and his mother had to care for him all by herself.
Join the club, we've got jackets.
But hey, you know what? I should maybe give him a little slack. After all, he's unhappy and he tried to kill himself. Why shouldn't I have a heart? He's telling everyone in his position that they will be found. Many of those kids and teens I've spoken with also had it rough. Many of them were unhappy, abused, neglected, or worse. Many of them can no longer be found. Who the fuck are you to say that they will? Okay, so now that everything has been said and done, I think I made a pretty good case for why this musical has issues. I'd love to leave it at that and call it a day, but then the thought occurred to me and I just couldn't leave it at that. Part of me still genuinely sees potential in this musical and believes that with a rewrite here and there, Dear Evan Hansen can actually work. This is of course all hypothetically speaking, but let's play fantasy screenwriting here and think of a great way to go about telling this story. How would I tell this? Honestly, I'd make the simplest little change that would alter the dynamic of how the story is actually told. Have the musical be told through both Evan and Connor's perspectives simultaneously. You can still keep the songs since they're the only thing Pasek and Paul have written that's actually good.
They're in the bars or through the smokescreen of the crowded restaurants.
Get that shit out of here! Hell, you can even keep Evan's suicide attempt, but if the musical is going to have any weight and meaning to it, telling the story from both sides would help flesh out Connor's character and give a new perspective that was missing from the original version of the show. You can have Evan and Connor actually have some kind of relationship. Not necessarily close, but enough that Evan knows Connor enough to care about him when he kills himself. Maybe instead of him trying to write fake emails about their relationship in order to fulfill some kind of facade, have Evan go through every one of the memories that he had with Connor. Maybe the two knew each other a lot closer than we expected them to. Maybe the two had a fight that ended on bad terms. Show us everything from Connor's perspective as well. How he felt about Evan, how he felt about his family, life, anything. Instead of it being shifted onto somebody else's perspective that we really do not need to be hearing about. Maybe even show a slight hint of something more between him and Evan. Feelings that he might have had that were probably too confusing for either him or Evan to understand. There could have been a mutual disagreement between those feelings and the two could have severed ties as a result. This can lead into You Will Be Found and serve a better purpose and not just be generic feel-good nothingness. Since this time it can be framed from the perspective of someone who lost somebody that he cared about twice over. Act 2 can revolve around the overexposure and glorification of Connor's death, and Evan feeling guilty because of what happened, since he believes Connor killed himself because the letter that he finds was used to rub in the poor thoughts that he had about him when he confessed how he felt. His relationship with Zoe does become romantic, but he still feels guilty every time they're together as he cannot look at her without feeling the shame of what happened to Connor eating him up inside. The truth of Evan's deception can be discovered, and instead of the brunt of the discussion falling onto the Murphys, it all falls directly on Evan's shoulders after accusations of why Connor truly killed himself begin to surface, leading him to confessing what actually happened and talking to his mother about his suicide. The Murphys are heartbroken, Zoe is devastated, and Evan's mom takes the time necessary to talk to her son and be there for him when he failed to be there for his former friend. The story ends on a note of hope and optimism as Evan finds a letter from Connor, the real suicide note he left behind, saying that even though he still feels awful about what happened, he would want nothing more than for Evan to know that he forgives him and that he wishes for him to look back and remember what's really important. This leads to the story closing as he writes a final letter to himself and to Connor, apologizing for how he reacted and accepting who he is, vowing to change for the better, not just for Connor, but for himself. Honestly though, that's just how I imagine a revised version of the musical would be. The movie adaptation is coming very soon, and if the producers are to be believed, it appears that they're going to be doing at least some attempt to fix the issues I pointed to. Though the lack of some specific songs tailor-made to give Evan some level of accountability leave that claim with a galaxy-sized asterisk above its head. Am I going to be watching the movie in theaters? Yes. Will the movie be good? No. No. I deduced that this was going to be one of the worst movies of the year, and I was 100% right. The movie's failing critically, and I don't believe it's going to do any better financially. And to be honest, I don't even care. This movie will cause controversy regardless of what I have to say. The people who love it will love it, and Twitter will be filled to the brim with hot takes, apologists, and a whole bunch of nonsense that left me just a little bit burnt out. Even just talking about this musical is draining me emotionally from wanting to watch any musicals ever again. Because it's something so toxic and so controversial can be loved and praised with willful ignorance towards the problems that it has, or at worst, given justification and excuses, then honestly, after all this, I think I need a minute. I'm Sebastian from Cinemageddon Reviews, signing out, and I'll see you on the wasteland. God damn it. Whew, boy, this was a long one. And the best part is, it's not even over yet. There's a post-credits scene just to justify everybody having to sit through the entirety of this video just to get more ad revenue that I'm not going to be able to get because YouTube decided not to monetize our channel. So, that sucks. Still, I am very proud of this video. It took me nearly a year to complete, quite literally, and I am very excited for all of you to see the final result. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like what you see here and you would like to see more, then be sure to like, share the video with your friends, and subscribe for more content. And like I said before, since we're not being monetized for our work, if you would like to support our show, then check out our Patreon page for bonus content and exclusive rewards, including the chance to request for a show or movie for us to review in the future. As always, I'm Sebastian from Cinemageddon Reviews signing out, and I'll see you on the wasteland. What? I'm gonna try to forget about this whole thing. Come on, give me some music or something to listen to, something that I can actually try to help me forget about this whole mess. I'm not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, 'cause no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, I'm gonna send the flood, gonna drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me, look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen, I make no apologies. This is me. God, I love this song. Why does this song sound familiar? Oh, no! 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 I know where the hell this is going, and I am not gonna fucking go there. Oh, Christ. Okay. I don't know what the hell got into me there, but I'm stopping this right now. Let's just... gonna focus on my boat burning video. That fucking video's over too as it is. What the hell's going on? Hello? That's weird.
Oh, God damn it!